We're good?
Yeah, it should be streaming now. I'll double check online, but it's setting up to go.
So I could go with the presentation now?
Go for it.
All right.
Okay. We're diving in. I can't see the, where it says the, here we go. Okay. Okay, so we're in the meeting. Local revenue, this is where we're going to start. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at what is local revenue for the school district. Where does local revenue come from? And is local revenue unlimited? So the first two questions on the what and where, local revenue is the revenue collected through school district tax levies. So whenever we say local revenue, it means the revenue that we get from our taxpayers, business and residential. If we say state funding, then that's state level. So those are the two main categories of revenue for major revenue streams for the district. So again, local revenue is revenue from the taxpayers. It comes from two types of taxpayers. A residential taxpayer would be a homeowner, and business property owners. All of those two taxpayers pay real estate taxes based on their residential or business property values. The last question, the third question, is local revenue unlimited? And the answer is no. And this is because back in 1976, and you'll see further in the presentation, Ohio Revised Code had a bill that's called House Bill 920, and this limits the collection of tax revenues for school districts. And operating tax levies are limited to the original tax rate and the original dollar amount. And we're going to see a example. I'm going to do a very simple example that shows this and how it impacts the district. So on local revenue, it's not unlimited, and it can't grow, but it can decrease, and you'll see the example for that. Other types of levies, such as bond levies, they collect an exact dollar amount that's necessary to make a finance payment for the bond proceeds. So what is the impact of local revenue for Warrensville Heights? For us, it's 60% of our budget. It's $20 million plus district, and it's a major revenue source for the district. Pretty much local revenue and state revenue make up almost 90% of our revenue. So when we do a projection on local revenue, we look at current events, historical information, and the interaction of projection variables that you'll see later. So for instance, one very current event that happened for us in the district was Amazon moving in. So when Amazon moved in, we were able to take a look at and see, how is this going to impact our revenue streams? How is this going to impact our local revenue? Even though there was an abatement, there's a 75% abatement, but there's still 25% that's non-abated. So we had to look at that and see how that impacts our projections. So that's like a real world example and real time example for us that's current. So that's how with local revenue that you look at. And there may be also a time where a new development of houses is going in, or other new construction on businesses. Those are all current events that would affect local revenue. So then local revenue on the 5-year forecast is actually reported in three line items. The one line item is general property tax real estate. The second line item is tangible personal property tax. Now, tangible personal property tax used to be, it's an obsolete tax stream from years ago that was eliminated by the state of Ohio. The remaining amount is what's called the public utilities personal property, which is mostly like electric power generator stations that are in the district. And so there's a value on that, and then we get the taxes on that still. Those are still paid. And then property tax allocation line, that is where residents, every resident that owns a house in the district gets a discount on their real estate taxes based on if they live in the house that they own and if the house is not it's not a business. So with that, and then there's also the homestead enrollment exemption that you get based on your age of the personal age of the individual that owns the residence. Okay, so all three of those go into this line item. The reason that they go into this line item is because the county auditor will give you a discount on your tax. So on your house, on your real estate taxes for your house, it's potentially a 12.5% discount. And this is on old levies because they've eliminated this discount on new levies. So it has to be on old levies. And you get that discount. So the county auditor collects a lower amount, and then the state of Ohio makes that reimbursement back to us. So that's why it's in two different lines. So in this line here, this is from the county auditor. This one's from the county auditor too. And then this one is from the Ohio Department of Taxation. So that's why it's 3 line items, and that's how it works on the 5-year forecast. So when we look at our local revenue on the 5-year forecast, we look at those 3 lines. Did you have a question, Mr. Roberts?
No. I just found that interesting. Go ahead. I'm good.
Yeah, so it's really cool. So for us to gross up and find out what our total gross revenue is, we have to take those 3 line items and add them together. And also each of those line items are projected, and you'll see that as we go into this. So how are real estate taxes calculated? That's the big question. The county fiscal officer applies a formula, and the formula is pretty simple. They take your house, the market value of your house, and multiply it by 35,000. So if your house is worth $100,000, the taxable value on it will be 35,000. Okay, and then it's multiplied by a tax rate. How come I keep losing my? There we go. It's multiplied by a tax rate. Now the tax rate is a total of all the tax levies based on the location of property. The school district's just one of the jurisdictions. You know, you'll have taxes for your libraries, for your local government, meaning like your city hall, the county services. So all of those are added up and they come up with the tax rate, okay? So here's, and I guess I jumped ahead. There are numerous tax levies based on the taxpayer's location. We talked about county taxes for special services. That could be for MRDD, family services, recreation, parks. Then you have your school district, permanent improvement levies for your city that you live in or the county for the roads, fire and police, local governments such as city hall, local and county libraries, community college. You know, there's probably still some more, but I was just trying to list, you know, like the main ones that you usually see. And then on top of that, there's different kinds of tax levies if we just hone in on school districts, because that's where we're going to concentrate on right now, because that's our revenue stream for the school district. And just as we said earlier, it's a major revenue stream for the school district, being 66%. So there's different kinds of levies that a school district can have. The most popular is an operating tax levy, and this is for general operations. And this is the one that's in the 5-year forecast. Then there's also permanent improvement. Now, the permanent improvement levy is restricted just for bricks and mortar projects for buildings or maintenance of buildings, facilities, equipment, buses, textbooks, computers, assets that have a life of more than 1 year. And then there's bond levy, and that's the one that we just recently passed, where you're going to pay a tax on the bond levy, and then the district is going to finance a large amount of money to put up the buildings. And then for the next so many years, it's like a mortgage. You paid a tax, and that tax covers the mortgage payment to pay for the buildings. And then the last one is an emergency levy. A lot of school districts started using the emergency levies because they have some unique laws where their collection, because they're based on a fixed dollar amount. In other words, an emergency levy would bring in whatever they predetermine that fixed dollar amount, and the tax rate will change to make sure it brings in that dollar amount. And the theory behind that was when they came out with emergency tax levies, the school districts wanted something to say, well, this is an emergency per se, that they need money for their operations, but they don't want it to affect their state funding. And an emergency levy doesn't affect your state funding. Just a few words on state funding, and we'll dig into state funding another day. But state funding is based on the state says, okay, everybody gets $6,020 per student, and they come up with the calculation. And then at the end of that calculation, then they apply an index. And the index that they apply, one of the indexes is what's the district's ability to raise taxes. If you can raise a lot of taxes, they're going to lower your state funding because they say, well, you can raise your own revenue. And then the second index they apply is local demographics. So we could get into that another time. Luckily for our district, we get the full amount plus. So this doesn't affect us as much, but I just wanted to give you a history of why they came up with emergency levies and why is an emergency levy different from an operating levy? And that's why, because it interjects with your state funding formulas. And then also on a levy, there could be a term. Okay, so levies can be put on for a limited amount of time, or they could be continuous. So continuing means once they're on the books, you can continue to collect that levy. And a continuing levy does not need a renewal. In fact, when I did my dissertation, I studied the passage rate of new operating levies that were continuous and had terms, because the new operating levies, whenever you have a new operating levy, that is potentially an increase in taxes. And it's still a low passage rate, only 2 to 3 out of every 10 pass. So I wanted to study the ones that passed. And then a limited term would be one that at the original vote, they may have an emergency levy that has a 5-year term. Some of the levies have a certain specific term they have to follow depending on law. The bond levy is going to last for the mortgage, just simplifying it, or the amortization financing time that you set up when you originally do the financing. So levies, there could be different types of levies, and then there's also terms on levies. So here's the district's levies for Warrensville Heights City School District. Notice the first one, it's called inside millage, and this is unique for everybody. And a lot of times people don't understand what inside millage is. And notice I put here, it came in with the inception of Warrensville Heights, okay? When governments were set up, when I should say local governments, when local governments were set up. So when Warrensville Heights, the city of Warrensville Heights was set up, and I think this would probably be an interaction with Highland Hills and also North Randall. When they were all set up, at one point in time, the state of Ohio gave out 16 mills of taxation, okay? So they gave that to them. And then the city of Warrensville would decide, well, how much do we want to give to the school district? How much do we want to give to the fire department, to the library, or police department? They decided on what those millages were. So the school district got 5.1 mills. And that goes all the way back to the history of when the government was actually created. And at that same point in time, that's when they set aside land for districts. That's where they set up the district boundaries. It's pretty much part of the, it goes back to the Great Western, they were expanding the West and expanding land. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but that's how far back it goes. So on inside millage, we will always collect 5.1 mills of inside millage. And you notice whenever we put a levy on the ballot, it'll always say, I'm sorry, it's not 16 mills, everybody got 10 mills, because it'll always say, what's the millage beyond the 10 mil limit. So in other words, the city of Warrensville has 10 mills. They gave the school district 5.1. So there's another 4.9 mills that are either divvied up between the city, fire, police, and all those other ones that I discussed. So on that one, it always collects 5.1. because you're going to see later in this presentation on how these numbers change and why they change. The next one is really interesting because 1976 is and I'm sorry, this is part of a history lesson, but this is how we're going to build our knowledge on the committee itself. That's why I wanted to, and we're really diving in. If we presented this at a board meeting, this could go on, this could be a really long board meeting. So that's why we want to hone in on the way that we're doing this as a committee. In 1976, House Bill 920, which I mentioned earlier in the presentation, that's when it came out. So pre-1976, the millage setup was different. So that's why this is such a large number, because this is an accumulation of all the levies that were there prior to 1976, okay? And you could see as in history, and remember House Bill 920 is the one that puts the limits on how much we can raise and how much we could collect with our taxes, okay? And House Bill 920 originated in California, just to give you some history on that. So in 1990, we had a continuous levy. That means it's always going to collect. And that one was for 5.9 mils. And then you can see 2 years later, we had another operating levy at 8 mils. In 88, 8.5, 1995, 9.5, 2005, 9.5, and then nothing after that. And then we have one levy we have an emergency levy on the books that started in 1990. And it's a 5-year levy. So every 5 years that has to come up for renewal. Other than that, we have all continuous levies, which is good. If you look at some of the surrounding districts, some of the surrounding districts were even famous for always having a levy on the ballot, and they were just renewals. And your taxpayers get something that's called tax fatigue. In other words, they say, well, you just were on the ballot last year. Well, a renewal would be no increase in taxes, but if it fails, it will be a loss in revenue for the district. So you're protecting revenue, but there's still the taxpayers always say that they have to go for vote, go for vote, go for vote, and it becomes a tax fatigue. So we're very fortunate that we don't have a list of levies that are up on renewal. And every district is a little different, but I think this is one of our fortunate advantages that the district has. So back to House Bill 920, I've been talking about it, but so House Bill 920, again, it came out in 1976, and this limits the collection of tax based on the original voted millage and total amount originally to be collected. So you're gonna like this because this is mathematical analysis and you're gonna see how it works. So, and this is just an example. If we had taxpayers pass a 5 mil levy, and that levy will collect $1.8 million, and it's based on total assessed value of $360 million for the district, which is pretty close to what Warrensville is right now. We're at $363 million. In other words, if we took all of the value of the whole district, every residential value, every residential and every business property, it adds up to $363 million taxable value. So the total value would be, because that's the 360, again, that's the 35%. So that's what we're basing taxes on, okay? So again, that's all of our values added up. So if we move on and we look at this, again, we're gonna apply the formula just like we talked about. Tax value times the tax rate is gonna give us what tax dollars are gonna be collected. So you see 360 million times 0.005 gives you $1.8 million. Now the 0.005, where does that come from? Well, it's 5 mils, and a mil, you divide it by 1,000 because it's 1,000. So if you took 5 divided by 1,000, it's gonna equal 0.005, which is right here. So House Bill 920 limits that collection on that levy to $1.8 million or 5 mils max. So the first year it comes on, it'll come in at 5 mils and it'll collect $1.8 million. But let's take a look at if that changes. So in this example now, we're gonna say, well, what about the next year? We had some increase in value, some business came in and added to our value, and our total assessed value goes up to 375,000. Well, this is what happens because it's limited. So 375 million times the 0.005 is going to give you 1,875. Is that more or less than our limit? That's a question just to see if everybody's awake. Oh, you got it. You got everybody muted.
Yep, we're awake. I am.
Oh, okay. I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yeah, so it's more than our limit.
Good. Yeah, so it's more. And the original
I
levy
didn't know there was
limit
going to be a
is
quiz,
1.8.
Dr. Rock.
Nah, I don't know. I just was throwing it out. I was getting sick of just hearing my voice.
No, go ahead. We're having fun.
Yep, I'm following
So,
you.
okay, good. So on this one, if the value goes up to 375, it's going to collect 1,875,000, which is more than the 1.8 maximum. So the county fiscal officer, what they do is they're going to decrease the millage. So they're going to go back to the formula, tax rate times tax value equals your dollars. Well, we know what the dollars are. We know what the value is. So they're going to change the tax rate. So the county fiscal officer, they're going to lower the effective, and that becomes known as the effective millage rate. They're going to lower it, and they're going to need, the millage rate is going to need to be 0.0048. Okay. So in this example, the district still collects $1.8 million, but all the taxpayers are going to pay a little bit less because values went
A little
up.
less.
So taxpayers like it when values go up. And I know sometimes they think that, like, oh, well, my tax value of my house, you want to keep it down, keep taxes down. But if the aggregate of all the values go up, eventually it's going to be a decrease in taxes because we're limited. Now, what if we looked at a decrease? So if we had a total assessed value of 360 million and it decreases to 300 million, and I made this pretty substantial so you could see it in the example. So now we take the 300,000 times the 5 mils, and it's only going to collect 1.5 million, but we need to collect 1.8. So if we go and we do the calculation, in order to collect 1.8 million on 300,000, we're going to need a millage rate of 6 mils. Now we got to go back to House Bill 920, and remember, it limits it has two limitations on it. One is it cannot collect more than 1.8 million. So we did that. But two, it cannot
It
go
can't collect more than 5
higher.
mils.
Exactly. You got
Okay.
it. So the county officer, they can only charge 5 mils. So what happens? Okay, well, again, we talked about this in 1976. Oh, wait a minute. So the county fiscal officer sets it at 5 mils. So they can only set it at 5 mils. We're going to collect 1.5 million. The district just lost $300,000. Okay. Now, if we look back, remember on inside millage, that millage never changes. So if values increase, the district's going to have an increase on that 5 mils, on that 5.1 mils. If values decrease, there's going to be a decrease. That's the one place where we do get a pure increase or decrease in revenue. So in summary, House Bill 920 has been out since 1976. Yes, on the inside millage. So since 1976, it's been out there. So as property values increase and decrease, the effective millage rate is adjusted for each levy. So all of those levies that we talked about, those will change, okay? And property values can change primarily every 3 years after triennial updates. The county auditor will come out and we just had one in 2018. So in 2021, we'll be up for another triennial update. And remember, we had good news. Remember, Warrensville was in the newspaper too for Cuyahoga County. We were like a 12% increase in values, which is good because we're coming out of the recession that we just had in the 2000s, like around 2008. So here's what our levies look like now. So we have the original voted, okay, but this is what's actually being charged.
Okay.
So again, notice on the inside millage, just as Mr. Roberts said, it doesn't change. So are there any questions on that? Okay, so I'll keep going. So this is what we use, our effective rates. So notice on this, in 1976, we had 29 mils, but we're only charging 10 mils. So what that says is since 1976, even though we had a recession back in 2008, values have increased to the point to where we decreased that tax rate. And you can see even on the older ones, 1980, instead of 5.9, we're actually charging 3.53. But then when you get down to the emergency levy,
Yeah,
it usually goes, with it going up, that means that over the period of time that that was in, we may have had some dips in value, and they had to increase the millage up. Right now, just at a first blush, I think we're at about 6 mills we're going to need to collect this levy, and we'll talk more about that further in the presentation. So now that we have all the history on how the millage rates work and the formula where it's assessed value times the millage rate gives you how much local revenue you're going to collect. Now we can look at how do we project this on the 5-year forecast? You know, how is this done? So on the 5-year forecast, it actually is called a collection formula because we have to add one more variable. We take the value of all the properties, we take a tax rate, and then we apply a collection rate because not everybody's going to pay their taxes at the same time. There may be a business that might be in trouble and they may not be paying their taxes. Eventually they'll be paid. So what you will eventually get is you get delinquent taxes. Someone's on hard times, they can't pay their taxes, so they don't pay. And then, so we collect. So you're never going to collect 100%. If you are collecting over 100%, it's not going to be consistent. And that usually means that someone paid up their taxes from a lot of years ago. You know, so it's not unheard of to have a collection rate that's above 100%, but it won't be, you won't sustain that because that's people catching up their payments.
Paying back taxes. Okay.
Exactly. So a collection rate is necessary for us. Right now, our collection rate is 92%.
Dr. Rock,
Yes.
do we assume that collection rate is going to stay stable over the 5 years, or do we make adjustments for fluctuation?
That's an awesome question. Right now, with the recession knocking on our door, we're going to adjust that collection rate down a little bit.
Yes, sir.
Doing a projection based on that there may be, we're going into recession and there may be an increase in delinquent taxes, in other words, less people paying their taxes.
yeah.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
But it's not as drastic as you think because there's a lot of interplay here. And it's very volatile too, though. I mean, it could go along with the recession. So you could have a group of people that don't pay their taxes, but there still could be a group of properties where someone sees a good deal and they're like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go buy that property. We're going to put a new business in your district. So now when they go and buy that property, that pays up the old taxes. They can't get.
Okay.
So that's why you have that total. It's so much interaction that you can't just say, oh, we're going to recession, we're going to lower our collection rate 5%.
Okay.
Right now, from what we're seeing, it's around 2 to 3%. And that's on the drastic side. So because you have all these things that interplay, but yeah, we will be lowering our collection rate for our projections. And then if it comes in better than that, then we use that as historical information. Now, our collection rate was very low when I first got here. It was at 62%, and then it got up to 67 to 69%. That was because of 3 major things. One was Amazon, the North Randall Mall. You know, that was just decrepit and no one was paying taxes on it. So that was in the delinquencies. And then we had 2 hospitals that were exempt from taxes, and they were fighting their case for multiple years. In fact, one case went on for 12 years, to where those 2 hospitals just quit paying their taxes because they knew they were going to win the case, but it was just a matter of it finalizing. So by them not paying their taxes, that lowered our collection rate. As soon as that was adjusted and that exempt property came on, our collection rate shot up. And in conjunction with the recession, getting out of that recession that we were in. So tax revenue projections for a 5-year forecast. We do a projection for every one of these variables. And that gives us a rigorous projection that we could use. So that, you know, it's not, is it going to be exact? No. Is it going to be the actual? No. But we have data on each of these 3 variables. So we could use that data to make a projection and then apply the whole formula and see what our total projection is going to be. So assessed value, when we look at assessed value, that's the first variable here. There could be changes in value based on history. So we could look at, you know, what's the historical data on that. We could know about a new business coming in the community, like ABB Controls or Amazon. There could be new developments. In other words, we see that a tract of land was bought and they're going to put up X amount of houses, okay? Tax abatements, we also have to keep a look at it for tax abatements, because that means that whoever's coming in isn't going to pay those taxes, but the district could potentially get revenue sharing agreements, or the portion that's not abated, we could still add to. So you have to look at that. Historical Board of Revisions, that's another constant mover where it's just constant. People are fighting their values for their taxable properties, and then there's could be good reasons for it, sales, and so that's constantly. So you have to look at the Board of Revision changes and property sales and values. That's a real valuable one on the residential side. There's data at the state where you can look at the average home sale value and track that, and then that helps you track your residential side. So all of those things help with that variable. Then on top of that, we need to do a projection for the tax rate value. So, and this one's a little more simple, because we know, is there a levy that's expiring? Are we going to have a levy on the ballot? And then effective tax rates based on assessed value projections. In other words, if assessed value, like we just talked about up until now, like when it went from 360 million to 375, we know our millage is going to change. Well, that we could use that in our projection. So you see how all these things interact.
Right.
And it's very
Dr.
interesting.
Rock, another quick question. Okay, when we have the fact that we have a levy renewal on the ballot, when we make the projection, do we make the projection with it passing, and also make it with without it passing, or do we just use what has happened in the past to project pass or not pass?
Your question is spot on. It's in the presentation you're going to see.
Okay, I'll hold out.
We have to project that it doesn't pass.
Okay.
But then lower in the 5-year forecast on a separate line, we say, okay, if it does renewal, here's the impact if it does renew.
Yes, sir.
So the proper way is to show it expiring, because you have to show
Okay.
the need. That's an awesome question. And then the last variable of our thing, remember we were saying assessed value, tax rate, and then the last one is collection rate. So we want to look at, well, how much have we collected in the past? What's our collection rate? What's the value? What direction is that? What are delinquency payments? We follow that too. Because again, if you have 1 year where your delinquency payments are always this amount, and all of a sudden it shoots way up. Well, if it shot way up, someone paid up. Well, now they're only going to pay once. They're only going to true up the payment once. Then they're just going to go back to their annual. So it's not going to be like, oh, it's going to be that high. So you got to look at that. And then also the recession impact on taxes ability, just what we've talked about. And exempt properties. That's real important to hone in on exempt properties, because if you have a new hospital being built in your district, it has to be taxable before it becomes exempt. And that's pretty much what happened with us. But unfortunately for us, it was over a lot of years, and it distorted our collection rate. Okay. So they have to build it first, and then they have to file with the county auditor and the state to say we are exempt. So it has to be, it comes on as taxable first. So a treasurer has to keep an eye on this to capture this, to know that, oh, wait a minute, I had a bump in property. What is that? Is it potentially exempt? Because then you don't want to use that in your projections.
Okay.
So after you do all of that.
Dr. Rock, one
Yes.
more quick question. I'm sorry for keep asking questions.
Oh.
Okay. Let's say with the hospital and with the tax exemption, will it be retroactive? Would there be a return on the taxes that they paid during the time that they would be applying for the exemption, or would it take effect at the time that it was approved?
Unfortunately, it is retroactive. In our district, about 4 years ago, we had to absorb a payment that went back to the hospitals.
Okay.
Luckily, when that came on, we had some increases that counterbalanced it. So it wasn't as big as a hurt, but so that's why I was saying it's better just to cap. It's nice if it would be in the same year, because then you don't have to be refunding anything back. It's just, and then they just don't pay taxes.
Okay.
Awesome question. And anybody has any questions, just raise your hand or break into the things so we can get you, because this is a group, I know I'm doing a lot of the talking, but this is still a group project. Okay, so the tax revenue projections on the 5-year forecast, these are right off of our 5-year forecast.
Okay.
So remember, again, it's assessed value times tax rate times collection rate gives you the projection. So if you look in 2017, I think this is the year that we had that payment, because you can see it's pretty low here, you know. 2017, 15.4 million. It goes up to 17 million. And 2018 was a triennial update. So this is where we had an increase in value. So that's why it went up so much, okay?
Okay.
Prior to this, if we had 2015, because it's every 3 years, okay? So 2019, that's where we're just completed, 18.9. This year, we're looking at 19.6. And now here's where our projections of lower collection rates, because notice it's not growing that much.
Right.
This is where we're applying, to be conservative, we're applying a lower collection rate in these future years until we know more about what this recession is. Now, what does that mean until we know more? Well, if we go through next year, when we collect next year, and this number goes up, now we have more historical data that we could follow, okay? If this number goes down or if it's about where we're at, then we know we have good projections into here. So again, every year, all three of these variables are going to be looked at again, but with one more year of data and
Okay.
1 year of current events. So that's how we keep up on all of that. So here's the draft 5-year forecast. And notice that, so here we have 15, 17, 18, 19. And notice this drops, 18.5, 17.8, 18 million, 18.2. That's because we have an emergency levy that's up for renewal. So again,
So we
have
make the assumption that that money isn't in the budget. Okay, got it.
Yep.
Got it.
So
Okay.
then what we have to do to look at it, we got to look at 2 line items. On the 5-year forecast, we're going to look at one that's up here near the top, and this is further in on the 5-year forecast. And by the end of the week, I will send out our draft 5-year forecast to all the committee members. I didn't want to give you one today that I'm still refining some of the numbers on it. So I figure I just want to give you the one that goes straight out on Friday, okay?
Yes, sir.
So if you add those together,
That's
now if you
fine.
look, thank you. So if you look at it this way, now you can see those numbers that we were talking about, the 19 million, where it has a little bit of growth, but not much, because again, we're adjusting for collection rates.
Okay.
So again, this is where I really wanted to dive in and show you a major revenue stream for the district, 66% of our budget, and how it gets projected. It's not just a matter of saying, oh, this grew a couple percent here and we're gonna go and just apply a couple percent increase, you know, or inflation is 2 or 3%. We look at all 3 variables.
Of the factors
Best value.
that create the computation. Okay.
Exactly. And then we project each of those variables, then we multiply it out. So it gives us a better a projection that's made with our sharpened pencil. Okay, so the emergency tax levy, this is a good segue into this topic. So the emergency tax levy we have right now generates $1.8 million, 1.85. It's a 5-year term. It's up for renewal in November 2020. It's going to be on this next board meeting, the step 1 to get the process rolling. This will be absolutely no increase in taxes, 0 increase in taxes, but it protects $1.8 million of tax revenue for the district. In other words, if it fails, then we would be at those lower numbers
Yes,
of tax revenue.
Okay.
So some key lines of the 5-year forecast. The 2 most important lines, and for our district, we're very fortunate, and Mr. Jolly does a great job. We work very close together to make sure that line 6.01, this is where we can control our destiny. In other words, it's the excess revenue over or under expenditures. In accounting, this would be called net income. You know, we're not a business that generates net income. So it's excess revenue over or under expenditures because we're a government. But anyways, it's net income.
Okay, got it.
So when you have net income, that means that you collected so much, you spent so much, and there's money left over, okay? When you don't have when you have a net loss, that means that you collected this much, you spent more, and there's not anything left, you know, you owe at the bottom, okay? So for us, that's current revenue minus current expenditures. The district has been within current revenue and current expenditures for the past 10 years. And that's good because number one, you're within budget every year. So you control your own destiny. There's no need for new revenue. Also, by the amount that you do this, by going over 10 years, you accumulate whatever was left over, whatever the excess is, and that's what we call a carryover balance. And that helps with the district also. So after looking at that line, I mean, most people would start looking at the bottom first and then going up here. But if you hone in on this, you're going to control your destiny. But you have to have an advantage to be able to do this. A lot of school districts are on a levy cycle to where every 3 to 5 years, this section goes into the negative. And then they have to use that carryover, and then they have to either have cuts, go for a new levy, or a combination of both, okay? We're very fortunate that for 10 years, we haven't had to add any new taxes. The new taxes that we did add was for facilities, and we were very strategic in the way that we did that to minimize the cost to taxpayers. But so this is just, when you're on the 5-year forecast, it's just the general fund. So then at the very bottom of the 5-year forecast, that's the other important line, and that's unreserved fund balance. And that shows if the district is solvent. The ending fund balance, and then so you end at a certain amount, and then you carry that into the new year, okay? So if we had a year where we had $1 extra, the next year we start with $1, and then if that year we spend within current, you know, by another $1, then we have $2 at the, you know, it accumulates. The good news is that the district is funded for the next 5 years. So all 5 of us.
Good news.
Yes. The Ohio Department of Taxation, or I'm sorry, the Ohio Department of Education will look at our 5-year forecast. If you have more than 2 negative years, like when you start to have 3, they want to know what are you doing? And if you have 4 negative years, that means like you would survive 1 year and now you're in the deficit. They really want to know, like you have to have a board approved data to say that, hey, we're either going for a new levy or we're in reductions, you know, so we got that, so we don't have to worry about that. But what we do have to do is we want to protect that balance. We want to carry that forward. That's our fiscal stewardship to the school community. But then also the balance to provide the best educational opportunities that we could within our budget. So that's how that works. So we're nearing the end, and I'm sorry, this meeting was a lot of me talking, but I wanted to lay the groundwork, and we're certainly going to meet again. We're going to build on this. The takeaway for today is local revenue is limited, you know, and a lot of people don't get to see the interaction of that. And I think having that simple example where, you know, values went down, the district actually lost money because they can only charge so much tax, and where values went up and the tax rate went down, but the district still collected the same amount. And how we project local revenue, how it's, you know, it's those 3 variables and we do a projection for each variable in order to come up with a rigorous projection for the district, since it's a major line item. And then also that the district continues to spend within current resources. This is a very, very powerful financial advantage for the district. And then also, lo and behold, the emergency levy will be up for renewal in November 2020 ballot. The board is doing the first step now at this next board meeting, and, you know, be continued on that. We'll have to start a campaign and get the word out on that. With that, I'm done with the presentation, so I'll take any questions or any comments or anything.
Well, we appreciate it, Mr. Rock. It's always good to rehash these because taxes is one of those annual things, and it's real easy to lose focus on what it all means because you don't see it every day. So it was a good refresher.
Really?
A lot of these things you've gone over before, and I'm real glad to hear them again. I'm also glad to see you guys are still doing so well and your projections look good in light of how things are going with the economy right now. That's very good.
Yeah, in fact, and we're going to weather this first arm of the storm, but it's still tough. The state funding, and I know I didn't dig into that, but you'll see that at the board meeting when we talk about the 5-year forecast.
Okay.
The state funding was cut $400,000 that they're cutting right now in May and June.
Okay.
We're able to absorb that. One thing that counterbalances that, though, is the state of Ohio gave us a 100% refund on Bureau of Workers' Comp premiums to the tune of about 170,000. So now instead of 400,000, it's 230,000.
It's good to see some of our government actually taking a part and trying to help, because this is no one person's responsibility. This is all of us.
And then in addition to that, the federal government is sending us almost $900,000 to help.
Federal money.
Yeah, so hopefully that'll help us, but we're still anticipating further cuts with the state funding, and that's in the projections.
Dr. Rock,
yes,
because with the state funding cuts, and I know there's some you mentioned money that's going to offset it. Have we looked at like the amount that we could we'll be able to absorb this, but with the continuation, have we looked at what amount we will be able to continue to absorb before there is a negative impact? Because we know, with the current state of the world, that there are going to be continued cuts. So, I mean, I know it may be early for that type of thing, but have we looked at, if we're cut by X, we can absorb that. But if it's Y, then we have a problem. Have we made those type of comparisons yet?
Oh, yes, that's built in the 5-year forecast. That's built in with my projections. So, and you'll notice on the 5-year forecast, when you get it, we have a unique phenomenon happening, though, because we're projecting cuts in state funding, but eventually it's going to go back up to at least where we were before, because every year it's supposed to increase. So we know that it's eventually going to return. So we're going to have 2 years that we're going to have a dip that we're going to have to work on. But then in year 3 and 4,
we shall return.
When the new levy passes, we're not in deficit spending. So it's unique that we have a little bit of deficit spending in 2 earlier years, but then in the outlier years, it corrects itself.
Okay,
the state funding does what we're thinking. So
and Dr. Rock, I'm sorry, and also with the state funding, if I remember correctly, when we were in Columbus for that briefing, the state funding is only about 25%, I want to say, of our revenue. Is that?
Yeah, it's about 25 to 30%. You're right.
Okay. All right. So, the bulk is what we went over today. So even with that hit, we still look pretty solvent at this particular point.
Yes. Yes. And our revenue sharing is really paying off too. That's coming in higher. So that's helping soften the cushion for us.
Yes, sir. All right. Thank you.
Substantially. So with all of these things interacting, we will have a little bit of deficit spending on current reserves, but we have the first thing is there's $900,000 that could be taken off of the 5-year forecast used with the federal stimulus. Now that's not in the current 5-year forecast because Mr. Jolly and I have to, we're barely even, it's not even listed yet, where we're getting the money from and when we could start getting it.
All right.
So we could pull expenditures off. That'll help us a lot. Okay. But that's only after the first, that'll help us a lot. And remember, in my 5-year forecast, I have a decrease projected for next year also. We're projecting a 10% decrease. So, the state funding is going down, down, down. But then eventually in that 3rd and 4th year, it should be returning back to at least the levels that where we're at right now. This biennial budget, we've been frozen where we were 2 years ago anyways. So we haven't had any growth there either. So it's pretty conservative. It's not it's not a bad projection to say that at this point in time, we're going to be cut, but we should return back to other levels. Now, all bets may be off if the governor comes out and says, no, it's going to be continuous cut, but we just don't know that right now. But we know for at least for the next couple of years, it's going to be going down.
All right.
Okay.
about it. I didn't want to go over an hour. I wanted to respect everybody's time.
Okay.
All
Well,
right.
thank you very much. I mean, that was very in-depth, very informative, and I thank you for fielding my questions.
No
Yep, I
problem.
appreciate it.
We will meet again and we'll dig in even further and we'll keep going.
All
Okay.
right. All right. Well, you guys take care. Everyone enjoy the rest of their afternoon.
You too, and
All
be
right.
safe, and we'll see everybody again soon.